right, welcome everyone to General Psychology, or Psych 100. Those of you who don't know me, which is probably very few of you, I'm Dr. Merritt. Be doing this all together this semester. At this point, we don't have an official course TA. We should by next Wednesday, so I'll provide you with some more information about that. What we're going to do today is a brief kind of introduction of what to expect for this semester, and then I'll sort of tell you what you'll need to do off the bat. I'm also going to send out an email, a little summary of what's you'll have to do before next Wednesday. Mostly, we're just going to do that today because I think as you've all started to figure out, the schedule at Georgetown, everyone's course schedules don't settle out for some time. So rather than diving into a bunch of material that some of you won't ever care about and some of you aren't here yet to hear, I thought I would just do a brief introduction, let you know what to expect, and give you a few things that I want you to do before we jump into the meat of class next Wednesday. So basically, you'll discover I make up words. We'll basically talk about what we're going to do this semester and get into that. But first of all, one of the first things I like to do is get you an idea of what psychology really is and what it really isn't. One of the biggest problems with being a psychology professor is people have a lot of assumptions about what I do. Tell people I'm a psychologist, what do you think the first thing they say to me is? Anybody know? Anybody ever told you they're a psychologist? First thing they always say is, oh, I bet you're analyzing me. No, you're not that important to me. I am not a clinical psychologist. I have no training in clinical psychology. I have no interest in clinical psychology aside from an academic perspective, and you'll soon discover why I'm not a clinical psychologist. First, I have no poker face, which is very important for clinical psychology because you can't let people know how crazy you think they are. And I'm no good at that. I am an experimental psychologist, a cognitive psychologist by training, as I have a PhD in cognitive psychology and cognitive neuroscience. So my work is primarily in human memory. My current interest is in primarily how we can use what we know about human memory to improve things like course instruction and learning in the classroom. So a lot of what we do in this class, the way I design my classes, is based on that cognitive science. So I got my PhD in cognitive psychology from Colorado State University in 2002, somewhere in there. Things start to get fuzzy when you get older. Somewhere around 2002, I did a postdoctoral fellowship in cognitive psychopharmacology at George Washington University. And then I've been an assistant professor at a couple places, Texas A&M Corpus Christi, and more contemporarily and of more interest to sports fan, I was a professor at Clemson University for 7 years. I arrived here last year, so I've been here for 2 years. So, that being said, a couple of things to keep in mind about having me as a professor. I am what we call an assistant teaching professor. So I don't have a research lab. I don't have graduate students. Teaching is my primary responsibility, which is great because I really enjoy it. And this has been really great teaching students like you guys. So I really do love what I do up here. That being said, I teach more students than almost anyone on campus. In the last year, I have taught, since I've been at Georgetown, I have taught 800 students. And this semester, I have 200 and some change, so just over 200 students. So I do have a few things I try to do to manage my life as a result of that. One of which is if I see you on campus and I don't recognize you, it's not that I don't care about you, it's just that I have so many students, so I'll say hello. And stop me if I don't recognize you. I'm happy to chat with you. I love chatting with students. So it's not that I'm trying to ignore you, it's that there's a sea of you out here. And I just followed up with a class just as big. So right before this class, in the same classroom, I have another class the same size. So, and I'm middle-aged and my memory's going. So a couple other things to keep in mind. I also live with my 74-year-old mother who has dementia, so I'll get to tell you some stories about what that's like as we move along. But also keep in mind that I'm kind of like a single parent, that I have somebody I have to take care of at home, so occasionally that interferes with my life here. We try to keep that to a minimum, but just keep that in mind. Now, you also will notice I ramble on occasion, but they'll usually be important rambles. So what is psychology? Well, again, we get at this point where what do you think it is? Anybody come in here with an idea about what you're supposed to know or learn about? Nobody? You guys took this because you have to, right? Well, the great thing is a lot of what you think this class is going to be, it is not going to be. We'll mention Sigmund Freud's name about twice. He'll come up in personality, because that's where there's some decent stuff. He'll come up when we talk about the role of the conscious and the unconscious mind. Aside from that, we'll also talk about him when I talk about cocaine, because that was Freud's favorite thing. And I don't say that to disparage his memory. I think I don't judge. It's the thing you'll discover about me is I'm very rational about these things. But I think it's important when you look at Freud's work to understand who he was. So when he talks about the fact that the sense of smell is the most infantile, it's because he had no sense of smell, because he had wrecked it through years of cocaine use. So what we will be talking about, though, is psychology as a science. And in fact, we will primarily approach psychology from a biological perspective. That is, we'll talk a lot about the brain. So those of you who don't know Latin, I don't either. I don't like to pretend like I always do this because it makes me look smart. Nemopsychologist, physiologist simply translate into one who is a psychologist. No, wait. One cannot be a psychologist without being a physiologist. See, look there. I screwed up my own ability to translate Latin. Basically, what Mueller is saying is you can't really study the mind without studying the brain. So we're going to talk about these things from a joint perspective. So we're going to talk a lot about the brain. In fact, at about the third or fourth week of this class, you're going to be like, I didn't remember signing up for a neurobiology class. But that'll be early on just to get some of the basics out of the way. So we will talk about neurons and the brain and its various and sundry subcomponents. But then we'll start talking about how all of that starts to work. So we'll talk about perception, we'll talk about cognition, we'll talk about memory and personality. The thing we'll probably talk the least about, and in fact in the fall semester, we didn't get to it at all because I'd gotten behind and I allowed my class to choose what they wanted to talk about. And it turns out they wanted to talk about sex and love more than crazy people. So we won't talk that much about clinical psychology. Again, it's not my area of expertise, and there are far greater experts in this field. So if that's of interest to you, after you're done with this class, abnormal psychology is certainly the class to take. I talk more about clinical psychology in my drugs and human behavior class, which I teach online. So if you want to learn more about how people are treated for depression or schizophrenia, that's a class that I do offer. So, show you a little bit of an idea about the kinds of things we're going to explore this semester. Anybody notice anything funny about this elephant? How many legs does it have? Yeah, it's kind of hard to figure out. It's got somewhere between 8 and 14. Did anybody see that picture going around? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. Did anybody see that picture? I just remembered that I used this one, and now there's a contemporary version. Anyone see that picture going around the internet of how many sets of legs there are of that group of women sitting on the couch? Did anybody see that? It was running around Facebook for a while. Like, it looked like somebody had absolutely no legs. And it was this basic kind of visual illusion. So what we're going to do is, and the thing is it looks normal until you start to look at it, and you're like, why is this foot here, but there's a leg here? We'll talk about how our perception is guided by our knowledge. So we know what an elephant is supposed to look like, or in theory, and it's certainly not supposed to do this to us. So it looks normal up here, and then when you get down to the focal details, it starts to really screw with your mind. This is sort of a different variation of a couple different illusions. This is one I've come up with. It's called the Mulerlyer Illusion. The question, of course, is, which of these lines is longer? Yeah, they're the same. Of course they are, but You're looking ahead. But they don't look the same, do they? No. So as soon as we do this, they're the same length. But watch this. Even though you know they're the same length, they still look different lengths. And the reason why this illusion is so prevalent for us has to do with the kinds of environments we were raised in. Because this essentially is how all of most Western society's buildings are. Look around you. It's essentially, these kinds of corners are essentially what create this kind of illusion. So it turns out this is actually a culturally based illusion. That is, it depends on where you were raised, where your visual system grew up, as to whether or not you fall prey to this kind of illusion. So we're going to talk about things like how our experiences are related to who we are today and how they result in our biases and our perceptions. What's important about that is when we talk about biases, people always think about, oh, well, we're biased to believe certain ways about certain people. And it turns out we're biased to do all sorts of things. Because our brains do so many things automatically that we see things that aren't exactly how they are, that is, we perceive them in ways that are different from the way they are in the world. And so we actually have a lot of cognitive biases that we live with, and they're perfectly fine, they're perfectly benign, but some of them are not. So when we talk about some important social questions, like officer-involved shootings, we have to start to ask ourselves how many automatic biases are involved in those processes, and in how we process news information, and how we do all sorts of other things. So when we start getting into these applied questions, we'll start to see how psychologists can play an important role in modern society in ways that most people don't think about. One of the classes I'm teaching this semester that I'm very excited about is on cognitive science and public policy. So why is a psychologist teaching a class on public policy? What's the goal of all public policy? Anyone have an idea? Well, why do we have speed limits? To keep people from crashing into each other, right? But that speed limit sign, what's it really trying to do, and what that officer that pulls you over and writes you a ticket, what's that designed to do? Yeah. Control you, right? Yeah. Yes. That's the most honest answer I've ever gotten. Yes. Our overlords are trying to control us. It's not that ominous. But the goal of public policy is to regulate human behavior at its core, right? I mean, really, it's to keep you from drinking too much. It's to keep you from doing this and walking into the street, and I don't know. So we do things like design roads to keep them safer. So the whole realm of public policy is essentially trying to get you to do things, right? Get you to take the bus instead of driving, get you to pay your taxes, get you to do all sorts of things, right? So that's one of the areas that we're going to talk about, is how psychologists can play a really important role in that. In fact, I'm trying to get a guy to come to my seminar. We live in a both great and terrible place for a lot of reasons. But one of the great things is the city of Washington has created a laboratory in public policy, and essentially they're doing field experiments to see how things like police-worn body cameras might affect how police interact with the public. And so they've actually designed a randomly controlled experiment to see how that works. And so there's some pretty exciting stuff being done in this area, so it's a pretty fun area. So this is one of the other things we'll talk about, something like intelligence. This comes from a test of fluid intelligence called Raven's progressive matrices. And essentially the idea here is you're supposed to figure out what goes in this box, right? And so we have to figure out what the progression is this way, what the progression is this way. So if you look at the sort of vertical progression, see, this way we're losing a box, this way we're adding, so we have to figure out what goes here. It's probably, I think it's this one. That makes sense. Yeah. So this one will, oops, sorry. Yeah, the next progression here is we're adding one this way. No, that's not it either. It's already that one. This is why I should look at these things before I come to class. Actually, I think it's this one makes the most sense. Yeah. I used to be better at these fluid intelligence tasks. We'll talk more about these. Anybody have a different solution to that? I don't know, it would take all day. Fluid intelligence is one of these really interesting things that's tied with lots of things like working memory, or at least we think it is, although the guy who came up with that research told me the other day that he was wrong. So we're going to talk about things like fluid intelligence and how it develops, and also how lots of things are related to how our intelligence develops. I'm pretty excited. Hopefully I'll get to go to it at the Association for Psychological Science, which is over in DuPont Circle. They're actually having a speaker come and talk about her research in how stress and socioeconomic status relates to brain development and how that relates to intelligence. There's lots of interesting things going on in this field. So this is going to be my last example of sort of the kinds of things we'll be talking about. This comes from a talk I've given on if you want to take over the world, become a cognitive psychologist. So, fundamental question we might have about our lives is, where do I want to live? Where do I want to raise my kids? And so when I give this talk, I asked the audience, where do you think you're most likely to die in a pool of blood, in the city or in the suburbs? It's a loaded question, obviously, right? Well, most people think it's safer to live in the suburbs, right? That's why they move out there, they take their kids out there, have these lovely manicured lawns. But it turns out you're most likely to die at an early age if you live in the suburbs. So the one area in which the inner city might be less safe for people aged 15 to 19 years is in homicide. A little bit more likely to die. So the way these graphs work is the further to the left you are, the more urban you are. The further to the right you are, the more rural you are. So the reason you're most likely to die in an accidental death or in an unnatural way, because you're likely to die in your car, much more likely to die in a motor vehicle accident the further away you live from the city. The reason for that is basic base rate probability. That is, the further away you live, the more rural your life is, the more time you spend in the car. The more miles driven, the more likely you are to die in an accident. So you're much more likely to die at an early age if you live in a rural place than if you live in an urban place. But why do we think it's the opposite? Anyone have any theories about this? Yeah. You're talking about sort of what do we hear the most about, right? We've become immune to death by car accident because it's just part of our background noise of our lives, right? Unless it's something really weird and spectacular, car accidents don't make the news, right? But every time somebody gets shot, that makes the news. So we have an overemphasis. That is, we sort of sensationalize homicide deaths in a way that make them seem like they're more prevalent. So you're right there, exactly what I was trying to say. Yeah. Well, most people in the city actually don't drive. And so that's, here in Washington, if you're going to get into a car accident, it's not going to be that bad because you're not going to be going more than 1.5 miles an hour anyway, right? And that's part of it. But it's also because very few people here drive. And if they do, they don't drive very far. And so, but part of it, again, it's about this perception of risk. We've accepted the fact that we might get into a car accident, and we forget about it. Like if you were traveling somewhere by plane, which is the most dangerous part of your trip? It's actually getting to the airport. Well, you're more likely to die on your way to the airport or on your way from the airport because, again, you're in a car. So all this is about what we perceive as our risk. So this is where we start to get into things like how people misperceive risk. And part of it has to do with we're not very affected by 1 in 55 people will die this way. That doesn't mean anything to us. What means more to us are stories. So we're much more affected by seeing somebody's face on the news, seeing, life cut short. Um, so the car accidents we often do hear about are usually younger people, or there's a lot of people involved, or something. Usually there's got to be something sensational about it, right? But the reason why we hear so much about homicides is because we hear so much about it on the news, and so we overestimate the probability of us getting shot and killed. As they say in the news business, if it bleeds, it leads. Right? So that's the reason why so much of that is focused on in the news. So we tend to really not have a good handle on what things are risky and what things are not. Probability is not something we're very good at. So we're going to talk about things like that. Okay? So psychology at its core is the scientific study of mind and behavior. Okay? So the mind is, of course, our private inner experience. As psychologists, we refer to feelings of inner experience as phenomenology. So when we talk about what's happening in a psychological sense, we have two things we parse out. What is resulting in the person's behavior? That is, what have they said? What have they done? These are the things that we can observe. We're going to talk about science and how psychology is at its core a science and scientific method, and we'll talk all about those sorts of things. The problem with being a psychologist is oftentimes we're interested in studying the mind. And so the only way we can get at this phenomenological question is to ask people about it. How did that feel? Can you tell us what was going on inside your head at that time? And that's obviously shaky ground. First of all, people have to sort of have some access to that information, right? Not everyone, I think we can all agree, not everyone is as good at understanding their own sort of inner thoughts as others. We'll also discover we're all pretty terrible at some of this. We overpredict and underpredict in a lot of ways. How many have ever walked into an exam perfectly confident in your ability to do that exam and opened the exam and discovered you are not? Anyone else? Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah. Surely more than one of you. I know you've all had that sort of what we call the oh shit moment, right? You'll also discover I kind of swear like a sailor. I try to keep it in check, but once in a while. We've all sort of done that. You've gone in like, man, I really know this, and then you open the exam, you're like, oh, did I study for this exam? So part of that has to do with this kind of question of, do we have the ability to understand whether or not we will remember something later? So we talk about mind, and we, of course, talk about behavior, which is observable actions of human beings and non-human animals. So we can measure behavior in lots of different ways. We can measure reaction time. We can measure how accurate you are at finishing that Raven's progressive matrices thing. We can measure behavior in lots of different ways. In the more modern 21st century version of psychology we all live in, we potentially have access to peering into the mind a bit through technology. That is, we can see where your brain is busy doing things. So we can measure where it's using blood, for example, or where it's using up oxygen in a technique called functional magnetic resonance imaging. We can see where it's using certain chemicals through PET scans. We can see, in some ways, the electrical activity in your brain. So we can get a little bit of access to that mind, but really to understand its contents, you have to tell us. We can't plug you into a computer and see what's happening in your brain, at least not yet. Hopefully that never happens, because that would be frightening. But that's really what psychology is. So we're going to struggle with questions. And I think, for me, if we know what the questions are, it's more important than knowing the answer, right? Most of the time, we're always so wrapped up in the answer, we always forget what the question is. So what are the bases of our perceptions, thoughts, memories, feelings, or sort of subjective sense of self? Where does that come from? One of the things neuroscience, certainly the social neuroscientists, often try to do is figure out, where is your sense of self in the brain? It's an important question, because you probably don't want to have that removed, right, in a surgery. Of course, I don't know, I've met some people that wouldn't be so bad. So how is our sense of self captured? What is it that makes up our sense of self? And it's a complicated question. A lot of it's memory, right? So if I ask you to describe yourself, you're going to tell me probably where you're from. That's part of your sense of self. sort of who you are. Some of you will have very strong religious identities, ethnic identities, sexual orientation identities. All of these things are wrapped up in who we are, and that's who our sense of self is. And so it's memory, it's feelings and emotions. So all of those things are things we'll talk about. So how does the mind usually allow us to function effectively in the world? Notice I'll put usually. Sometimes the mind likes to do things like trick us, so our perceptions are sometimes off. Oftentimes, it will trick us into making decisions that are against our interest because we think of a short-term versus long-term gain differently. We'll talk about what's called the reward pathway. We'll talk about how that's related to things like drug abuse and drug use. So we'll talk all about how the mind usually allows us to function and also times when it doesn't function correctly. We'll talk about different brain disorders, all sorts of stuff. So then the next question is, why does the mind occasionally function so ineffectively? Like, why are we so terrible at some things? So, for example, we're terrible at predicting how we're going to perform in the future on lots of tasks. So if I ask you to tell me which of the following things you'll remember later, you'll do terribly at it. It's just something we're not very good at. That's one example. We'll also talk about how we're pretty bad at estimating things like risk, make a lot of assumptions. But one of the important things about this kind of class, and one of the reasons I teach it the way I do, is I think it's important to at least let you see these things for yourself, and if you know about them, then you know potentially how not to fall prey to them. I also want to arm you because there are plenty of people who are like me, study these things, but they don't study them because they're interested in them. They study them so they can get money out of your wallet. So advertising at its core is psychology. Economics at its core is psychology. So we're going to talk about all of these things from an applied perspective, both to allow you to understand what's happening and also to provide you with some tools of the trade. So today, we're going to finish this brief introduction to the course and the syllabus. Next Wednesday, because of course, we get a day in and then we get a day off, right? I love the spring semester. It's completely broken up with breaks. So then on Wednesday, we're going to talk about empirically derived suggestions for improving learning and study habits. Normally, or I used to, I should say, I don't normally, I used to cover this when we got to memory. And then I realized that's stupid because what I really need to do is do this at the beginning so you can get some good tips on how to study effectively. And essentially we're going to talk about this as learning how to learn. As it turns out, most of us don't really know how to learn effectively. So we'll talk about that. And then we'll get into talking about foundations of psychology. So that's kind of our beginning of the semester agenda. So here's me. I already kind of gave you a brief history. My office is directly above us in 301F, White Gravener. So you just go up those stairs, and then as you walk into the hallway, there's a door, go through that, and I'm right next to the kitchen. I have set up a course email. This is where you can send questions about the grade book or what happened in class or anything that I don't necessarily have to answer. This is going to be how you'll get a hold of the course TA. So that's going to be your first stop for questions about the class. The reason I've done that is email is one of these phenomenon. When somebody emails me, they always expect a response back. And what sometimes will happen is I'll get 35 emails with the same question. And so what I'll do is I'll address it to the class, and then at the end of the semester, people in my evaluation say I never respond to my emails. So I'm trying to head that off a bit by providing this kind of email for those kind of general housekeeping questions about the grade book, about anything like that. And the course TA, whomever that is, will handle that. You can get a hold of me directly. I encourage you to do that, but do that with, try to save that for important questions. If you really have something you want to talk to me about, there's a question about that you didn't understand in class, those are the kinds of things to direct towards me. Or come by my office hours. They'll be after this class from 4 to 5, or from 5 to 6 on Tuesday, Thursdays, or just drop by. This is really the best way to get a good answer to your question because oftentimes uh, it, it's an exchange of, trying to understand something. And doing that over email never works very well. Email's one of those things that works well for some things, but trying to dig into a question you have about the course material is frustrating usually for all of us. You can also, if you're interested in starting a conversation with people on Twitter, you can use this Twitter hashtag. I've discovered that while I keep thinking people will talk about course information, usually I end up with things like tagging people with pictures from class and stuff. That's fine too. I don't care. So here are the formal. Yeah. They're different from the ones on the. Yeah. So take out your syllabus. It has actually a couple of errors. Thanks for pointing that out. In my rush to print them out this morning, you'll notice that today it is not 2015. So you can probably scratch that from the top. Forgot to change that. Change that to 2017. And then, yeah, my office hours are incorrect. They are posted. This syllabus is posted on Canvas. We'll talk about here in a minute. And it's correct. I corrected it before I posted it. I was actually going through changing all the stuff in this lecture and made that error. Oh, and I somehow did not delete Adam's office when I was deleting all of his TA. That's the old TA's office, so pay no attention to that. Just scratch that right out. Okay, so these are the formal objectives for the course. These are on your syllabus and probably easier to read there. So we use basic psychological terminology, being able to use psychological terminology, concepts and theories in psychology to explain behavior and mental processes. One of the things you'll discover about this course is it's a lot of vocabulary. So you're going to learn a lot of new terms and what they mean and how they apply. You're going to essentially get an entire dictionary's worth of new terms, which is what college is supposed to do, but it's much more in this class than anything else. Let me back up a couple slides and show you how to identify those. In general, I do this as much as I think to, but whenever I highlight something, that's generally one of these kind of terms you're going to need to know. So they'll generally stick out. So explaining why psychology is a science with the primary objectives of describing, understanding, predicting, and controlling behavior and mental processes. So just understanding this is a science not unlike any other. We'll talk about really how science is nothing magical. Science is just simply a way of getting knowledge. It's a way of getting at truth. It's what we call an epistemology. So it's a systematic way of gaining knowledge. So we'll identify key characteristics of major content domains in psychology. So cognition, learning, developmental, biological, and socio-cultural. So you'll be able to understand the key concepts of those. And by the way, these learning objectives are based on sort of what the field expects, but also any of you thinking about medical school? Okay. This class is now covered on the MCAT, and so I try to keep that in mind. I actually, one of the things I do for a side job, I have a lot of those, but one of them is working on I work for a company that writes practice exams for the MCAT. And so a lot of the things we'll talk about in here are covered on the MCAT. To describe examples of relevant practical applications of psychological principles to everyday life. This is my entire approach to teaching, is how does what you learn in class apply to everyday life? Very few of you will go on to be psychologists, so I'm not training you to be psychologists. I'm training you in how psychology applies to your life. You obviously have to get some basic knowledge of psychology as part of that, but I want you to see that this is stuff that really does matter. So use psychology concepts to explain personal experiences and recognize the potential for flaws in behavioral explanations based on simplistic personal theories. Essentially what I'm arming you with here is how to avoid some basic traps in explaining behavior. So teach you how to look at things like personality tests and why they're so popular. Sure, many of you have taken the, latest round of quizzes that pop up on your Facebook feed or social media feed, right? Anyone know which Hogwarts house they're supposed to be in? Right, that one. We'll talk about this thing called the Barnum effect, which is when you get a personality description, you take the pieces that you think agree with you and pay attention to those, and the things that don't describe you, and you ignore those, and you say that it's a good description of your personality. So this is what we call astrology, numerology, any sort of pseudo-psychological description like that is because of the Barnum effect. That's why they're so popular. So you'll be able to describe research methods used by psychologists, including their respective advantages and disadvantages, something we do early on. Explain how psychology can promote civic, social, and global outcomes that benefit others. Again, this is a really important thing for me. I want you to be able to take what you're learning and use it to make this world a better place. It sounds so dewy-eyed and optimistic. I'd rather you make it a better place and not a worse place, so let's try that. So describing psychological related issues of global concern. So we'll talk about things like poverty and how it's an important psychological concept because it does things like influence how our brains develop. We'll talk about things like migration. When we get to talking about social psychology, we'll talk about some very famous work by a guy named Mulerlyer Illusion, who looked at how we view in-groups versus out-groups. One of the things that happens with out-groups is we view people who are from a different group as all being the same. It's called the out-group homogeneity effect. And this is where you get people who describe out-groups with very broad brushes that everyone in that group is the same. Right? And so if you look at the migrant crisis in Europe, you see this in the rhetoric. They're all here to be lawless and to take over. They're all here taking our jobs. Maybe this sounds familiar? That's the out-group homogeneity effect, and we'll talk more about that. Questions about those learning objectives? Okay, so this is your textbook by Dan Schachter. Really pretty. It's I don't know. As far as textbooks go, it's good. I know Dan Schachter. I don't know that he could pick me out of a lineup, but I met him a couple times. Brilliant cognitive psychologist. This textbook is designed in a way to maximize learning, and so that's one of the reasons I selected it. Covers topics very well. There's some things that I don't like about it, but if I nitpicked to death, I'd never pick a textbook. So you will need it. First question to answer, because every week you will have a quiz over a single chapter. So every Sunday you will have a reading quiz due, and you can do it anytime during the week. We'll have a single quiz due every Sunday. That we want to do this Sunday, it won't be over the first chapter. It'll be just over stuff we talked about in class, but I have to finish updating the Canvas site. But those quizzes will be due every week every Sunday at midnight. That'll be 10 to 15 multiple choice questions. You'll have 15 minutes to do it from the time you start. So this isn't anything that's going to take up a ton of your time, aside from reading the chapter, which you should be doing anyway. So you read the chapter and you'll answer some questions. The reason for that, those have to do with how tests affect your learning. And in fact, one of the best ways to learn something is to answer a question about it. That is to try to remember it. And so what I'd like you to do, you guys are at home doing this yourself, when you answer those questions, just answer them. Try to answer them from memory. Don't go flipping through the book to try to find the answer, because you won't get as much benefit from it. They're designed so that you can not do well on them and still get 100%. So you'll get 1 point for every question you get right. You get up to 100 points, and there'll be like 160 questions to answer over the semester. So if you get like half of them right, if you got 50%, you'd still get a B average on the quizzes. So you can earn up to 100 points. So percentages don't matter. You just get a point for every quiz question you get right. They're designed to help you learn. They're not designed there to really test your knowledge. We're going to be using a couple things in this class that are a little bit different from other classes you might have had. Has anyone used this app called Tophat? Anyone used an iClicker? Anyone? Yeah. How many of you liked toting around an iClicker? None of you. Nobody wants to carry that around. Well, the great thing is all you have to do is bring your phone, which is, you've got it anyway, I know it, which is fine. A lot of people will nag you about not using your phone in your class. I'm just going to take control of it and make you use it for my purposes. So we're going to be using a tool called Tophat. So you'll need to set up a Tophat account. It's got some minimal cost associated with it, $20-some. It's cheaper than an iClicker would have been, so I'm trying to save you some money there. There is a little nominal cost to it, but we will be using it every day in class. So you can download the app to your phone. You can do that, or you can go, you can bring your laptop and answer questions on your laptop. I think you'll find the app is easier. And if you don't have a smartphone, you can actually text in your responses once you set up your Tophat account. The join code for this class is 319659. I'll be sending out an email with the details of all of this and show you where to go. The great thing about Tophat, I tried not using Tophat last semester, and it just didn't go as well. So what we'll be using Tophat for is attendance and participation. So in a class this size, I can't grade your participation based on whether or not you speak up in class, because when you have 100 students, nobody ever speaks up. But the other thing is it's also impossible for me to keep track of who's talked in class. With this many people, you just can't do it. But that doesn't mean we can't interact. So first thing is I'll collect attendance that way. You get some points for being here every day. It's like 3 points towards attendance and participation. Participation will come from a couple of areas. So I'll do some demonstrations. So you'll actually sort of participate in some kind of experiments, and we'll collect data from those. We'll take a look at those. I'll have you answer some review questions. A couple of things I'll have you do before you come to class. So, for example, when we get to personality, I'll send you off to do a personality assessment, and then I'll enter some of your information from that in Tophat. Have you do things like assess your own sleep. We're going to do lots of kind of interactive tools, and we'll use Tophat for that. And so that's how you'll get those participation points. I like it because it's an objective way to evaluate your participation, because you have to be here and interact with this stuff. And it also is designed to help you learn, because we're going to be seeing these phenomena in action, and so we'll get that kind of interactivity that way. Be 3 exams. Each exam is worth 100 points. But I will drop your lowest regular exam. So of the 3 regular semester exams, I will drop your lowest score. That being said, if you miss an exam, that's your lowest exam score. So I won't let you make up an exam that you miss. The reason for that, the reason I dropped the lowest exam is, one, everyone has a bad day, right? I don't want one bad day to be debilitating towards your grade. This is also a class where people underestimate how difficult it will be, and so scores on the first exam tend to not be very good. We get some adjustment, people start to study. Also, so here's the other thing. The material gets easier. So the hardest part of this semester is the very first exam. That's the toughest material. And then it starts to get a little easier. By exam 3, it's a lot easier, at least from an objective standpoint. So my best suggestion is to not throw away a dropped exam on the fact that you don't want to study for an exam. And I understand that. The other thing is that sometimes you just get busy. You've got exams all in one day. So the other thing that allows is the third exam is the last day of the semester. And you've all been here at least one semester, I assume. So what's the last week of the semester like? It's chaos, right? Total, absolute chaos. Well, if you have done well on exams 1 and 2, you don't have to take exam 3. And that frees you up from not studying from an exam that last week. Not bad. Now, the kicker is the cumulative final is mandatory. Everyone has to take it. And it is on the last Friday of exam week. Don't blame me. I didn't schedule it. If you cannot make that time, then you probably should find another class to take, because I will not reschedule unless there is an absolute dire reason you can't be here. So if your cousin's wedding is that weekend, or your brother or sister's graduation is that weekend, you can't be here, you'll have to find another course. That's just only reason I have to say that is because if I allow one person to, I have to allow everyone, and now I'm trying to schedule 250 exams. Yeah. It's Friday the 12th, 13th. Friday the 13th? Oh, that's ominous. I don't know. It's on here, I believe. It's the 12th, yeah. Friday the 12th. Okay, so see, it's not bad. Yes. Yes. So they're all multiple choice. Again, look around you. Do you think I want to grade 100 essay questions? The benefit, though, of having a professor who is a little obsessed with technology is I have discovered this awesome app that allows me to score your exams with my phone. And so your exam scores will be up probably before you get back to your dorm, because I can scan them as you turn them in. It's pretty magic, I have to say. So we'll sort of approach that when we get to it, though. It's this really cool thing called ZipGrade. And so when you get you also get your exams back. I'm a big believer in providing feedback. We'll talk about the cognitive reasons for that next Wednesday. Sorry, the clock at the back room, for any of you who are noticed, is not working. So if you wonder why I'm looking at my watch, that's why. So there'll be multiple choice. You'll get them back. You'll get a chance to figure out what you did wrong. The other great thing about ZipGrade is it'll actually have a picture of what your exam looked like. So if you smudged or bubbled something weird on the answer sheet, you can come argue with me about it. And then I can actually pull up the image of your exam and we can look at it. Really, technology is awesome. So that's all of your exams will be graded that way. The quizzes will grade themselves in Canvas. So it'll all be pretty magic. So you have these weekly reading quizzes. Again, 10 to 15 multiple choice questions over the chapters. You'll do this on your own. You can get there at canvas.georgetown.edu. Don't go looking for it right now because I haven't posted them yet. I got my cognitive classes all set up. The quizzes are all written. I just have to get them assigned due dates and all of that and change it from the fall. So you get a point for each correctly answered question. You can earn up to 100 points. You get, again, 3 points per day for attendance, and then participation will be available in class and occasionally as homework. So all attendance and participation are handled via Tophat. This is the grading scale. I use a straight points grading scale. The reason I do my grades this way is I think it's important for you to know what you have to do to get what grade. Some classes you don't get that luxury, so they do weird things like curve it so that the top 5 people get an A and the next 10 people get A minuses. I prefer to have something with a clear objective in sight. You know what you have to do to get whatever grade you want. I don't care which grade you want. You know what grade you want. And so this is what you have to do to get there. So once you have reached that threshold, that's the grade you get. So this gives you a place to know where you need to get to in order to get the kind of grade that you want. So again, quick note about emails. I have 3 courses this semester. Can't answer every single email, hence the course email. So a couple emails I don't respond to. Anything that's on that syllabus that you're holding, this now 20-page document, anything that's in here, you're responsible for. In fact, your first quiz will cover this syllabus and the article attached to it. So if you email me a question that is on the syllabus, I probably won't answer it. Or you'll get a terse, I put that in the syllabus thing, asking me if I can reschedule your final exam. Don't send me that email either. Also, if it's midnight the night before the exam, don't email me with a question about something that you have a question about, because then I'll wake up and be like, oh, did they really think I would give them an answer at midnight? if you're studying the night before the exam and you don't understand something, it's too late. So if you have a question about something, make sure you look at your stuff, before like 6 o'clock in the evening. Despite my protestations otherwise, have something resembling a life, which generally involves trying to get to and from work. But I do, try to leave work behind. So I did create this fun little YouTube video. All right. I have an entire YouTube page, which that's the only cheesy cartoon on there, I promise. Okay, all right, enough. God, even my cartoon self doesn't know when to shut up. That's a little, tongue-in-cheek way to talk about email. I will post actually a link to my YouTube page, and in fact, I will be recording all of my lectures that I give while I'm doing it. You see the microphone. So those will be posted to Canvas, and I'll post them to my YouTube page as well. All of my drugs and human behavior courses there. My physiological psychology course is on its way to being there. So there's lots of stuff you can look at if you're interested. Because I'm sure you'll be at home missing my voice, and you'll want to listen to me drone on and on through a PowerPoint lecture. Kidding, of course. So this is the psychology course. This is the only trigger warning you'll get. We're going to talk about some sensitive stuff. We'll look at some gross stuff. We're going to probably watch a video where a guy gets a tamping rod shoved through his head. Some of them will be controversial. We're going to talk about things that are sensitive. So just be forewarned there. We're going to look at brain sections. We'll look at people with brain injuries. We're going to talk about people with mental illness. We'll talk about things like people who self-harm. Talk about sex, sexual orientation, drugs, race, power, stereotyping. We're going to talk about some stuff in here. All I ask is that we be respectful to one another. We'll try to talk about provocative things, but in a respectful way. And this is the only time I'm going to tell you that might happen. So, just be forewarned. Shit might get real in here. So, all right. Any questions about that? Well, we're going to yeah. No, you just have to participate. So I'm not going to look at you and say, she only got 20% on that memory, right? No, I'm not going to look at that. It's only that you answer them. It's about participating. Yeah, so that's not going to be graded on its content, just if you did it or not. Yeah, so that'll all be, again. Now, one thing I did not talk about, this is in your syllabus. There is often great confusion in terms of looking at the grade book. So there'll be a Canvas grade book, there'll be the Tophat grade book. And they unfortunately like to keep you appraised of what your percentage is in the class. I don't do percentages in terms of so I beg you, please, ignore the percentage thing on the side. Because it will make it look like you're not doing very well if you skipped a quiz, because you can. There's plenty of, if you don't get a quiz done, it's not the end of the world. They're designed there to help you, so if you miss one. Now, I've had students not do them, and that's 0 out of 100 points. Those 100 points are real, but they're yours to get. You just have to do them. So just do those. It's 15 minutes every Sunday. Even if you haven't read the chapter, do them anyway. Read the chapter first. But if it's Sunday at 11 and you're like, I forgot to read the chapter, flip it open, answer those questions to the best of your ability. It can't hurt, right? I'm not going to tank you because you missed a question. With Tophat, the Tophat gradebook is a total mess. But you get things like an attendance percentage, and that again doesn't matter because I don't keep track of the percentage. You get 3 points every day you're here. You may get some sort of weird percentage about participation. Again, keeping track of the number of points you have is most important. So what I'll do is about exam time, when I'm updating the gradebook anyway, I'll try to put a total of what your current quiz total is, what your current attendance participation total is, so you know where you are on your road to 100 points. Aside from that, just pay no attention. Both the Canvas and Tophat have the worst gradebooks in the world. One of the things you'll get is a notification when I go to put your exam in. It will tell you that there's a new assignment called Exam 1. I have to create an assignment that you have nothing to submit to in order to put it in the gradebook because they, for some reason, can't figure out how to insert a column into there. That's stupid. Anyway, so the gradebook's there for you to see what you're doing, but I will try to keep some other way for you to actually have some idea of how you're doing because you won't be able to do it just through that gradebook. Other questions? Yeah. Let's say if you miss a class, you just don't get those 3 points. Oh, if I miss a class? Oh, yeah. Well, we'll figure out something. Because that'll happen. You know, I like everybody else, I get sick, especially when you're around the same people. And usually, what there is I'll have a lecture. There'll be a lecture capture for you to watch, and then some interaction of some kind. So, and usually then I'll just everyone gets 3 points for that day. Something. Yeah. Yes, they'll all be. Right now, it looks like there's nothing in Canvas because I haven't published any of it. And the reason for that is I imported everything from the fall, and it all needs to be rearranged. So yes, all the slides will be there. I post everything in modules. I'm trying to clean up the way my modules look as well. And so there'll be like Module 1, Introduction to Psychology, and then in that will be a page with slides and links to YouTube videos, and then another thing with readings and other crap, right? Because I find stuff that I think is interesting that applies to the topic because I read a ton of news every day, and so I'll post that stuff, and that's just there for you to read. Won't be on the quiz. If there's something you have to read that's going to be on an exam, I'll tell you about it. So there's an article you'll read. There's an article attached to your syllabus that you'll need to read, and then also I'm going to post an article from Roeder and Karpicki, which you'll also read. So yeah, all the slides will be there. Any other questions? Yeah. Generally, yes. Every once in a while, I will have arrived deciding that I needed to make some really exciting change, or I'll discover an error. But in that case, you just need to tell me you forgot to post it, and then I post it. So, but yeah, they're usually be there beforehand. We'll talk on Wednesday about why you should actually be taking handwritten notes. This is actually better from a learning perspective. But if you don't, that's up to you. I mean, that's up to you. I'm not gonna. There are people. Does anyone banned laptops from their class yet? Yeah, that's a big thing. I don't know. You know, you guys are all technically adults, right? I feel like treating you as adults. You guys can make those decisions for yourselves. How you want to take notes is up to you. How you want to keep up with the classwork is up to you. I provide the slides because, one, I cover a lot of material. I don't know if you've noticed, but I talk kind of fast. I don't get as much grief about it. When I taught at Clemson, those folks from the South, I don't know if anyone been to the South lately? Yeah. I don't talk as fast as I do, which is fine. I'm not making fun of people with Southern accents. I don't mean that, but there's a different pace to the way people speak down there. And down there, they were like, "I can't understand anything you say," and then of course I would have to get out my redneck to English dictionary and figure that out. I get to make fun of rednecks because I'm half Irish and half redneck, so I get to do that. But my family's from. My dad's side of the family is from Central Florida, and so I mean it doesn't get any more redneck than a group of people from White City, Florida. I wish I was making that up, but it really is called White City, and it's called White City for the reason you think it's called White City. So we'll talk about, we can talk about sins of the father later. Um, I don't know. Wow, I really wandered off topic there for a minute, didn't I? My point to all that, and I did have one, is that if I'm going too fast, you need to just tell me, because I don't know. I mean, usually I'll try to find one person, one or two people who are taking notes that I can see if they're finished taking notes, and then I'll know I can move on. But if you miss something, you just have to tell me, because I don't know. The great benefit of this semester is I am recording everything. So if you miss something, you can always kind of go back and look at the recordings, because I know you guys want to do this twice, right? But those will be there for you. So you'll be able to go back and look at that. But that being said, I want you to understand this stuff, and please ask me questions. I don't ever mind getting interrupted. I really don't. There's usually, if you have a question, someone else has it, or if you have some point you want to make, there's something we're talking about, please do that, because I've found that, particularly here, students always add more to the class when they ask questions than they ever think they're going to. So if you have something that you're interested in, you want to talk about, pipe up, because I think that's when the class is the most fun, is when you guys kind of pipe in with your own interests and stories. So let's do that, okay? All right. That's going to be it for today, which oddly enough almost took us the entire hour. I will see you guys next Wednesday. Enjoy, your first holiday break. Just soon followed by another one. Yes. I can sign in a couple people. We'll have to see how many, because we're pretty full here, but yeah. I should see if I have. Oh, let me. Hang on. Before all